The sound of shattering glass jolted me from my daydream. I stared at the broken vase on the marble floor, water and lilies scattered around my feet. My hands trembled as I bent to clean up the mess, my mind racing with the conversation I'd overheard just moments ago. "Rodney, darling," I'd cooed into the phone earlier. "I was thinking we could have a nice dinner tonight. I'll make your favorite." "Not tonight, Jenna." He'd cut me off. His voice clipped. "I've got a late meeting. Don't wait up." I'd frowned, about to protest when I heard a woman's muffled laughter in the background. My blood ran cold as Rodney quickly ended the call. Now, as I swept up the broken pieces of porcelain, I couldn't shake the sinking feeling in my gut. After giving up my high-powered career to be the perfect wife Rodney wanted, was this how he repaid me? The doorbell rang, startling me from my spiraling thoughts. I wiped my hands on my apron and hurried to answer it. "Mom?" I blinked in surprise at the sight of my mother, Amelia, standing on the porch. She raised an eyebrow. "Well, aren't you going to invite me in?" I stepped aside, allowing her to sweep past me into the foyer. Her sharp eyes took in the shattered vase and my disheveled appearance. "What's wrong, Jenna?" she asked, her tone softening. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I hesitated, unsure how to voice my suspicions. It's Rodney," I finally managed. "I think he might be—" The words caught in my throat, but Mom's eyes narrowed in understanding. "Cheating?" she finished for me. I nodded, feeling tears prick at the corners of my eyes. Mom's lips thinned into a hard line. "That bastard," she muttered. "I never liked him, you know. Always thought he was too slick for his own good." "Mom," I protested weakly, "we don't know for sure." "Oh, please," she scoffed. "A woman knows these things, Jenna. You're not stupid. What did you hear?" I recounted the phone call, my suspicions growing with each word. Mom listened intently, her expression darkening. "Well," she said when I finished, "there's only one thing to do now." "What's that?" I asked, dreading her answer. "We catch him red-handed," she declared, a glint of determination in her eye. "No son-in-law of mine is going to make a fool of my daughter." I felt a flicker of hope at her words. "But how?" Mom's smile was positively wicked. "Leave that to me, dear. I didn't spend 40 years married to your father without learning a thing or two about men and their indiscretions." Just then my phone buzzed with a text from Rodney. "Working late again tonight. Don't wait up." I showed it to Mom, my heart sinking. She read it quickly, then looked up at me with fire in her eyes. "Perfect," she said. "We start tonight." As we began to plot, I felt a strange mix of excitement and dread. Was I really ready to uncover the truth about my marriage? And if Rodney was cheating, what would I do? The sound of a car pulling into the driveway interrupted our scheming. Mom and I exchanged a panicked look. "Rodney's home early," I whispered. Mom squeezed my hand. "Remember, act natural. We'll figure this out together." As the key turned in the lock, I took a deep breath and plastered on a smile. Whatever happened next, I knew one thing for certain. My life was about to change forever. I drummed my fingers on the steering wheel. My nerves frayed as I pulled into the parking lot of Hawkeye Investigations. The neon sign flickered ominously in the twilight, matching the churning in my stomach. "You're doing the right thing, Jenna," I muttered to myself, gathering the courage to step out of the car. The bell above the door jingled as I entered the dingy office. A grizzled man with a 5 o'clock shadow looked up from his desk, eyeing me warily. "Can I help you, ma'am?" I swallowed hard. I need to hire a private investigator." He gestured to the chair across from him. As I sat, he introduced himself as Frank Hawkins. "So what seems to be the problem?" he asked, leaning back in his creaky chair. I took a deep breath. "I think my husband is cheating on me." Frank's expression didn't change as he pulled out a notepad. "Tell me everything." As I recounted the suspicious phone calls, late nights at the office, and the woman's laughter I'd overheard, Frank jotted down notes. When I finished, he looked up at me with a grim expression. "I'll take the case, Mrs. Lane, but I have to warn you, you might not like what I find." I nodded, my throat tight. I need to know the truth. After discussing rates and logistics, I left the office feeling both relieved and terrified. As I drove home, my phone buzzed with a text from Rodney. "Great news. Found the perfect house. Can't wait to show you tomorrow." My heart sank. How could he be planning our future while potentially destroying our marriage? The next day, Rodney practically bounced with excitement as we pulled up to a charming 2-story home in an up-and-coming neighborhood. "What do you think?" he asked, grinning like a schoolboy. I forced a smile. "It's lovely, dear." As we toured the house, Rodney rattled off its features: gleaming hardwood floors, a gourmet kitchen, a spacious master suite. But all I could think about was whether he planned to bring his mistress here. "We could start a family in this house," Rodney said softly, wrapping his arms around me from behind. I stiffened, guilt and anger warring inside me. "About that," I began, turning to face him, "I think we should see a fertility specialist before we make any big decisions." Rodney's brow furrowed. "Why? We're both young and healthy." It's been a while, and nothing's happened," I explained, hating the lie but needing answers. "I want to make sure everything's okay." He hesitated, then nodded. "All right, if it'll make you feel better." As we left the house, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Frank. "Got some preliminary info. Meet tomorrow?" My stomach clenched. "Everything okay?" Rodney asked, noticing my expression. I plastered on a smile. "Just Mom checking in. So about this house." We spent the drive home discussing finances, with Rodney assuring me we could afford it with the savings I'd been squirreling away. Little did he know, those savings might soon become my lifeline. That night, as Rodney slept peacefully beside me, I lay awake, my mind racing. What would Frank's investigation reveal? And if Rodney was cheating, could I really go through with buying this house, knowing our marriage was built on lies? Just before dawn, I made a decision. I'd go through with the house purchase. It was a solid investment, affair or no affair. But I'd also start preparing for the worst. As the first rays of sunlight peeked through the curtains, I slipped out of bed and headed to the home office. It was time to dust off my old resume and see what opportunities might be out there for an ex-corporate powerhouse turned housewife. Whatever happened next, I'd be ready. Rodney Lane might think he held all the cards, but he was about to learn that his perfect little housewife had a few tricks up her sleeve. The sterile smell of the fertility clinic made my stomach churn as Rodney and I sat in uncomfortable silence, waiting for Dr. Patel to return with our test results. I glanced at Rodney, noticing the sheen of sweat on his forehead. Was it nerves about the results or guilt over his suspected affair? "Mr. and Mrs. Lane?" Dr. Patel's voice startled us both. She entered, a somber expression on her face. My heart plummeted. "I'm afraid I have some difficult news," she began, her voice gentle. "Based on our tests, it appears that conceiving naturally will be extremely challenging for you." I felt the air leave my lungs. Despite my suspicions about Rodney, a part of me had still dreamed of having a family with him. "What's the issue?" Rodney asked, his voice strained. Dr. Patel hesitated, then looked directly at Rodney. "The problem lies with you, Mr. Lane. Your sperm count is extremely low and motility is poor. It's highly unlikely you'll be able to father children without significant medical intervention." The silence that followed was deafening. I watched Rodney's face crumple, a mix of shock and devastation etched into every line. For a moment, I forgot about my anger and suspicion, reaching out to squeeze his hand. "There are options," Dr. Rao Patel continued, outlining various fertility treatments and their success rates. But I barely heard her. My mind was racing. If Rodney couldn't father children, then how? "We'll need some time to process this," I heard myself say, standing abruptly. "Thank you, doctor." The drive home was tense, Rodney gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. When we finally pulled into our driveway, he turned to me, his eyes red-rimmed. "Jenna, I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I know how much you wanted children." I swallowed hard, torn between comforting him and confronting him. "It's not your fault, Rodney. These things happen." He nodded, then surprised me by pulling me into a fierce hug. "I love you," he murmured into my hair. "We'll get through this together." For a moment, I let myself believe him, but as we entered the house, reality came crashing back. The private investigator's preliminary report, the suspicious phone calls, the late nights at the office, it all pointed to an affair. And now, with this new information, "I need some air," I mumbled, heading for the back porch. Once outside, I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and dialed my mother. "Mom?" I whispered when she answered. "I need you." An hour later, I sat at my mother's kitchen table, a cup of tea growing cold in front of me, as I recounted everything. The fertility clinic results, my suspicions about Rodney's affair, and the gnawing fear that had taken root in my gut. "Oh, sweetheart," Mom sighed, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "I'm so sorry you're going through this." "What do I do, Mom?" I asked, feeling lost. "If Rodney can't have children and he's having an affair—" Mom's eyes narrowed. "You think this other woman might be pregnant?" The possibility hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. I nodded, unable to voice the fear aloud. "Listen to me, Jenna," Mom said, her voice firm. "You need to get all the facts before you do anything rash. Wait for the full report from the investigator. And in the meantime, keep your eyes and ears open." I nodded, feeling a renewed sense of determination. "You're right. I need to be smart about this." As I drove home that evening, my mind was clearer than it had been in weeks. I'd play the role of the supportive wife, comforting Rodney through this fertility crisis. But behind the scenes, I'd be gathering evidence, preparing for whatever bombshell might be coming my way. Pulling into the driveway, I noticed Rodney's car was gone. A text message blinked on my phone. "Working late, don't wait up." I smiled grimly. Game on, Rodney. Game on. The manila envelope sat on my kitchen table like a ticking time bomb. Frank Hawkins had called earlier, his gruff voice tinged with sympathy. "Got the full report, Mrs. Lane. It's, well, you should see for yourself." My hands trembled as I reached for the envelope. Taking a deep breath, I pulled out the contents, a stack of photos and a detailed written report. My heart pounded as I flipped through the images. Rodney, arm around a young blonde woman outside a cozy Italian restaurant. Rodney and the same woman kissing passionately in a park. Rodney helping her into his car, his hand lingering on her lower back. I felt bile rise in my throat as I scanned the report. The woman's name was Carla Thompson, 28 years old, a junior executive at Rodney's company. They'd been meeting regularly for months, often during late nights at the office or business trips. The world spun around me as the full weight of Rodney's betrayal crashed down. I stumbled to the bathroom, barely making it before I emptied the contents of my stomach. As I rinsed my mouth, I caught sight of my reflection. Pale, shaken, eyes brimming with unshed tears. "No," I said firmly to my reflection. "You will not break for him." I marched back to the kitchen, snatching up my phone to call Mom. She answered on the first ring. "It's true," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. The investigator confirmed everything. Mom's sharp intake of breath crackled through the line. "Oh, Jenna, I'm so sorry, sweetheart. What are you going to do?" I paused, considering. "I'm going to divorce him, Mom, but first, I need to be smart about this." We talked strategy for the next hour. By the time we hung up, I had a plan forming. Just then, my phone buzzed with a text from Rodney. "Heading out for a business trip. Back in 3 days. Love you?" I snorted. Business trip, indeed. More like a romantic getaway with his mistress. But this time, his lie was exactly what I needed. Over the next 3 days, I was a whirlwind of activity. I contacted a divorce lawyer, gathering all our financial documents. I reached out to old colleagues, subtly putting out feelers for job opportunities, and I started packing, carefully selecting the items that meant the most to me. On the third day, as I was sorting through some old photos, I came across our wedding album. Tears pricked my eyes as I flipped through the pages, remembering the hope and love I'd felt that day. How could Rodney throw all of this away? The sound of a car in the driveway jolted me from my reverie. Rodney was home early. Panic surged through me as I scrambled to hide the evidence of my plans. "Jenna?" Rodney called as he entered the house. "I'm home." I plastered on a smile and went to greet him. "Welcome back, honey. How was your trip?" Rodney's eyes darted away guiltily. "Oh, you know, same old boring meetings." As he rambled on about fictitious client dinners, I studied him. The man I'd loved, the man I'd given up my career for, he was a stranger to me now. "Actually, Rodney," I interrupted, my heart pounding. "We need to talk." He frowned, noticing my serious tone. "What's wrong?" A deep breath, steeling myself for the confrontation to come. "I know about Carla," I said quietly. Rodney's face drained of color. "Jenna, I can explain," but I held up a hand, silencing him. "Save it. I want a divorce." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with finality. As I watched shock and panic flicker across Rodney's face, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. The worst had happened, and I was still standing. Whatever came next, I was ready to face it head on. My hands shook as I smoothed down my blazer, staring at my reflection in the mirror. It had been years since I'd worn anything but comfortable housewife attire. The woman looking back at me was a stranger, determined, fierce, ready to reclaim her life. "You've got this, Jenna," I whispered to myself, grabbing my portfolio and heading out the door. The small accounting firm, Greenwood & Associates, was a far cry from my former corporate glory days. But it was a start. As I sat in the waiting room, my mind raced with a mixture of excitement and terror. Could I really do this? Jump back into the workforce after years of being a housewife? "Mrs. Lane?" A kind-faced woman appeared. "Mr. Greenwood will see you now." The interview was a blur of questions about my past experience, my skills, and the gap in my resume. I explained my situation as diplomatically as possible, leaving out the sordid details of Rodney's betrayal. "Well, Mrs. Lane," Mr. Greenwood said, leaning back in his chair, "your experience is impressive, but I'll be honest. That gap in your employment is concerning." My heart sank, but I refused to give up. "Mr. Greenwood, I understand your concern, but I can assure you my skills haven't diminished. In fact, managing a household budget and investments has only sharpened my financial acumen. Give me a chance, and I'll prove my worth." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, Mrs. Lane, we'll start you on a probationary period. Welcome to the team." Relief and joy washed over me as I shook his hand. "Thank you, sir. You won't regret this." As I left the office, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Rodney. "Where are you? We need to talk about the divorce." Reality came crashing back. I had a job now, but I was still married to a cheater, still living in our shared home. It was time to make my final move. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing with plans. When I arrived, Rodney was waiting, his face a mask of false contrition. "Jenna, please," he began. "Can't we work this out? I made a mistake, but I love you." I held up a hand, silencing him. "Save it, Rodney. I'm done listening to your lies." His expression hardened. "Fine. If that's how you want to play it, we'll let the lawyers handle everything. But don't expect to get much in the settlement. You haven't worked in years, remember?" A small, satisfied smile played at my lips. "Actually, Rodney, I just got a job. And as for the settlement, I think you'll find I'm entitled to quite a bit." The color drained from his face. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the savings I've been managing, the investments I've made. Oh, and let's not forget about our new house. I think I'll be keeping that." Rodney sputtered, his composure cracking. "You can't do this." "Watch me," I said, my voice steel. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some packing to do." I brushed past him, heading upstairs to our bedroom. As I pulled out my suitcases, a strange mix of emotions washed over me. Grief for the life I was leaving behind, excitement for the future ahead, and a burning desire for justice. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my mother. "How did it go, sweetheart?" I took a deep breath, looking around the room that had been my prison for so long. "It's done, Mom. I got the job and I'm leaving Rodney tonight." There was a pause, then Mom's voice came through, filled with pride and determination. "That's my girl. I'm on my way to help you pack. It's time to start your new life, Jenna." As I hung up, I caught sight of myself in the mirror again. This time, I recognized the woman staring back at me. Strong, resilient, ready to face whatever came next. Let Rodney have his affair. I had a whole new life waiting for me, and I was ready to seize it with both hands. The front door slammed open, jolting me from my packing. Rodney's voice boomed through the house. "Jenna, where are you?" I froze, my heart pounding. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. I was meant to be gone before he returned from his business trip. Steeling myself, I descended the stairs. The sight that greeted me in the living room knocked the wind out of me. Rodney stood there, his arm wrapped possessively around a young blonde woman. Carla, I presumed. Her hand rested on a slightly swollen belly. "Well, well," Rodney sneered. "Looks like the little housewife is trying to run away." I straightened my spine, refusing to be intimidated. "I'm not running, Rodney. I'm leaving. There's a difference." Carla giggled, the sound grating on my nerves. "Oh, honey," she cooed. "Did you really think you could just walk away after everything Rodney's done for you?" Rage bubbled up inside me. "Everything he's done for me? You mean like cheating on me? Lying to me? Making me give up my career?" Rodney's face darkened. "That's enough, Jenna. We're here to settle this like adults. I want a divorce." The words hung in the air, even though I'd been expecting them. "Fine," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Let's talk terms. Rodney's lips curled into a smug smile. It's simple. You'll get a modest alimony. After all, I've been the breadwinner all these years. You should be grateful for anything you get. I bit back a laugh. If only he knew. Oh, and one more thing, Carla chimed in, her hand caressing her belly. We'll be needing the house. For the baby, you understand. The room spun around me. A baby. The one thing Rodney and I could never have. The betrayal cut deeper than I thought possible. You can't be serious, I whispered. Rodney shrugged. It is what it is, Jenna. Carla and I are starting a family. You had your chance. Something inside me snapped. Years of pent-up frustration, anger, and hurt came pouring out. My chance? You mean in the years I spent supporting you, managing our home, investing our money? The career I gave up because you insisted on having a traditional wife? And now you waltz in here with your pregnant mistress and expect me to just roll over? Rodney's face flushed with anger. Watch it, Jenna. Remember who holds the purse strings here. I laughed then, a sharp, bitter sound. Oh, Rodney, you have no idea, do you? Confusion flickered across his face. What are you talking about? I took a deep breath, savoring the moment. I'm talking about the fact that I've been managing our finances for years. Those investments you never bothered to look at, they've tripled in value. That little savings account, it's not so little anymore. Rodney's jaw dropped. Carla looked between us, her smug expression faltering. And as for the house, I continued, I think you'll find that I'm entitled to half of everything, including that. So no, you won't be moving your little mistress in here. You're bluffing, Rodney sputtered. I smiled, feeling a surge of power. Am I? Why don't we let the lawyers sort it out? I'm sure they'll be very interested in how you've been misappropriating company funds to finance your affair. The color drained from Rodney's face. You wouldn't dare. Try me, I said, my voice steel. For a moment we stood there, the air crackling with tension. Then Rodney grabbed Carla's arm. We're leaving. This isn't over, Jenna. As the door slammed behind them, I sank onto the couch, my legs shaking. I'd done it. I'd stood up to Rodney, to Carla, to the life that had been suffocating me for years. But as the adrenaline faded, fear crept in. Rodney wouldn't go down without a fight. And now, with a baby on the way, the stakes were higher than ever. I reached for my phone, dialing my mother's number. Mom, I said when she answered, my voice breaking. I need your help. It's time to finish this. The conference room felt suffocating as I sat across from Rodney and his shark of a lawyer. My own attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Gloria, sat beside me, her presence a comforting anchor in the storm. Let's get this over with, Rodney growled, his eyes never meeting mine. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the battle ahead. Fine. Let's talk about the house first. Rodney's lawyer leaned forward, a predatory gleam in his eye. Mr. Lane is willing to be generous. He'll allow you to stay in the house for 6 months. Get back on your feet. I couldn't help but laugh, the sound brittle and harsh. Get back on my feet. That's rich coming from you, Rodney. Tell me, how's Carla enjoying my home? Rodney's face flushed red. Leave her out of this. Gentlemen, Gloria interjected smoothly. Let's focus on the facts. The house was purchased with joint funds, and Mrs. Lane has been managing the household finances. She's entitled to her fair share. Rodney's lawyer scoffed. Fair share? She hasn't worked in years. What could she possibly contribute? I felt a surge of anger, but Gloria's hand on my arm kept me grounded. Actually, she said, sliding a folder across the table, Mrs. Lane has been quite busy. These are records of all the investments and savings she's managed over the years. The room fell silent as Rodney and his lawyer pored over the documents. I watched Rodney's face pale as he realized just how much I'd been doing behind the scenes. This can't be right, he stammered. Oh, it's right, I said, my voice steady. And there's more. I want the house, Rodney. Not just for 6 months. For good. His head snapped up, eyes blazing. You can't be serious. What about Carla? The baby? The mention of their child sent a sharp pain through my heart. But I pushed it aside. Your infidelity and your new family are not my concern. I've spent years investing in our future, and I'm not walking away with nothing. Rodney's lawyer whispered urgently in his ear, but Rodney waved him off. He spat. Take the damn house, but don't think you're getting anything else. I exchanged a glance with Gloria, who nodded encouragingly. Actually, Rodney, there's one more thing. I want half of everything. including your company stocks. The color drained from Rodney's face. You can't touch those. They're in my name. Gloria cleared her throat. Actually, Mr. Lane, given the length of your marriage and Mrs. Lane's contributions to the household, she's entitled to an equitable distribution of all marital assets, including your stocks. Rodney leapt to his feet, his chair clattering to the floor. This is insane. I won't let you ruin me. I stood slowly, meeting his gaze. Ruin you? Like you ruined our marriage? Our future? Face it, Rodney. You underestimated me, and now you're paying the price. For a moment, I thought he might lunge across the table at me, but then something in his eyes changed. The fight drained out of him, replaced by a cold, calculating look that sent chills down my spine. You want to play hardball, Jenna? Fine, but remember, I know things about you, too. Things that could make your life very difficult. My heart raced, but I refused to show fear. Is that a threat, Rodney? He smiled, a cruel twist of his lips. Let's call it a promise. You push me too far, and I'll make sure you regret it. As Rodney stormed out of the room, his lawyer scrambling to follow, I sank back into my chair, suddenly exhausted. Gloria squeezed my shoulder reassuringly. You did well, Jenna. But this isn't over yet. Are you ready for what comes next? I closed my eyes, thinking of everything I'd been through, everything still to come. When I opened them again, I felt a new resolve stealing my spine. I'm ready, I said. Whatever Rodney throws at me, I can handle it. It's time to finish this, once and for all. The doorbell rang, its chime echoing through the empty house. I took a deep breath, smoothing down my blazer before opening the door. Rodney stood there, a shadow of the man I once loved, his face haggard and eyes bloodshot. Come to beg for the house back? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. He pushed past me, stumbling into the foyer. You ruined me, Jenna. Are you happy now? I closed the door, turning to face him. Ruined you? What are you talking about? Rodney laughed bitterly. Don't play dumb. The company demoted me, sent me to some backwater regional office, all because of your little stunt with the divorce proceedings. A pang of guilt hit me, but I pushed it aside. I didn't do anything except stand up for myself, Rodney. Your choices led you here. He whirled on me, eyes blazing. My choices? What about yours? You were supposed to be a wife, not some corporate shark. The old Jenna might have flinched at his words, but not anymore. I was both, Rodney. I managed our home and our finances. I made smart investments while you were busy with your affair. Don't blame me for your failings. Rodney's face crumpled. How did you do it? How did you outsmart me? I sighed, suddenly feeling very tired. It wasn't about outsmarting you, Rodney. I just paid attention. I learned. I planned for our future while you planned for a different future, didn't you? He sank onto the stairs, head in his hands. What am I supposed to do now? Carla left me. The baby. It wasn't even mine. The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. All this pain, all this betrayal, for a lie. I'm sorry, Rodney, but that's not my problem anymore. He looked up at me, eyes pleading. Can't we start over? I made a mistake, but we had something good once, didn't we? For a moment I saw a flicker of the man I'd married, but then I remembered the lies, the betrayal, the years of putting my dreams on hold. No, Rodney, we can't go back. It's time for both of us to move forward. I reached into my pocket, pulling out an envelope. Here, this is the profit from selling the house. Half of it is yours, as we agreed. Rodney stared at the envelope, then back at me. You sold the house? But I never wanted the house, Rodney. I wanted what it represented, our future, but that future is gone now. It's time for a new one. He took the envelope with trembling hands. What will you do now? I smiled, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. I'm going to live, Rodney. I've got a new job, new goals. I'm going to be the woman I always wanted to be, not just someone's wife. Rodney stood slowly, looking around the empty house one last time. I really messed up, didn't I? We both did, I said softly. But it's not too late to start over, for either of us. As I watched Rodney walk out of the house, out of my life, for the last time I felt a mix of sadness and exhilaration. The past few months had been a whirlwind of pain, anger, and revelation. But standing there in the empty foyer of the house we once shared, I realized something profound. I was free. Free from the lies, the expectations, the stifling role I'd forced myself into. Free to be Jenna Lane, not just Mrs. Rodney Lane. My phone buzzed. A text from Mom. All packed and ready? You sure about this? I smiled, typing back a quick response. Absolutely. Time for a new adventure. As I locked the door behind me, I took one last look at the house. It had been the stage for so much drama, so much heartache. But it had also been the crucible that forged me into the woman I was now, stronger, wiser, and ready to take on the world. I climbed into my packed car, the open road stretching out before me. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in years, that uncertainty felt thrilling rather than terrifying. Goodbye, Rodney, I whispered, putting the car in drive. Hello, life. As I pulled away from the curb, I felt a surge of excitement. The road ahead might be bumpy, but I was ready for whatever came next. After all, I was Jenna Lane, survivor, fighter, and architect of my own destiny, and my story was just beginning.
Hello, I am Sophia, a 35-year-old woman, and I've been taking care of our home for 10 years now. My husband, Robert, is a doctor. We don't have kids, but we've been pretty happy, until one day, everything changed. Robert came home late, like usual, and dropped a bombshell. I want a divorce, he said. I'm marrying another woman. I was shocked. What do you mean? We didn't marry for love, he added, and he was right. Our marriage was more of an arrangement. His parents wanted him to marry, and I guess I seemed like a good match. We barely knew each other before we tied the knot. The only thing we really had in common was our last name. Looking back, maybe I was drawn to the idea of sharing the same last name. So, we rushed into marriage, and for a while, we managed all right. I never thought we'd end up divorcing after 10 years. Even though our marriage wasn't built on love, we had been together for so long. But now, out of the blue, he wanted to marry someone else. When did you start betraying me? I asked. But Robert denied it. He said he met this nurse at the hospital about a year ago and was drawn to her charm. He claimed he was tired of living with someone as boring as me. I was shocked and hurt. How can you say that after all these years? I asked. But Robert was cold. He said living with me had been like hell and that he was done. I agreed to the divorce, even though it broke my heart. But then, Robert dropped another bombshell. He said we didn't even need to go through the legal process because he never officially registered our marriage. We were just living together, not legally married. I felt betrayed and angry. Robert had kept this secret from me all these years, and now he was using it to avoid giving me anything in the divorce. That day was supposed to be when he submitted our marriage registration. But instead, it was the day our marriage officially ended. I couldn't go because of an urgent matter, but it turns out he never submitted it. Not submitted. Are you joking? We've been living as a married couple for 10 years. It's impossible that you didn't submit it. Normally, yes. That's why I made that rule at the beginning. If you went to the office, everything would be ruined. When we got married, we made some rules. I, as a homemaker, would handle all the household chores. I was on an allowance, and part-time work was prohibited. Robert would handle all governmental and official matters. Why would you do such a thing? I asked. Because I was about to be forced into a marriage with someone I didn't love. It's not like I was going to submit it easily. I was saving marriage for someone I was destined to be with. Then you should have refused the marriage proposal in the first place. I couldn't refuse. My parents are stubborn and wouldn't listen. What would have happened if I said I didn't want to marry? Plus, I wanted a housekeeper. A housekeeper? I asked in disbelief. I'm a busy doctor and can't often tend to household chores. So, I decided to marry you as a housekeeper. It was a good deal for you too, right? You could eat well and have a roof over your head without working. You seemed desperate to get married too. What, were you probably feeling pressured because your friends were getting married, right? Robert sneered. Even though we weren't actually married, you were seen as the woman who married a doctor. This 10-year relationship was a win-win for both of us. That's all it was, and it ends today. You should be grateful for the good times you had. Now, you have to live on your own without relying on others. I was stunned. I can't believe this. Oh, and one more thing, Robert added with a smirk. Don't tell my parents about this. If you do something unnecessary, you know what will happen to your father, right? My heart skipped a beat. My father, who runs a medical equipment sales company, had a contract with the hospital where Robert worked. It was through my marriage to him that this connection was made. If I told my in-laws, Robert was implying he'd sever the contract as a threat. In other words, he was blackmailing me not to do anything unnecessary. It's your fault for being deceived. How pitiful to be thrown out with nothing, he laughed. But the one who would be thrown out without knowing anything was actually him. I couldn't help it, I burst into laughter. What's so funny all of a sudden? Robert asked, confused. I can't believe you became a doctor with that kind of knowledge, I said, chuckling. What do you mean? I knew all along about your mistress. And I knew you never submitted our marriage registration. That's impossible. That's why I've been preparing, waiting for the day you bring it up yourself. Preparing to get my revenge on you. In truth, I had suspected my husband's infidelity for the past 6 months. But without solid evidence, I couldn't confront him. So, I decided to hire a private investigator to look into the matter. Ma'am, there are 2 things I need to tell you, the investigator had said. The first is that your husband is indeed having an affair. We've gathered evidence of him entering a hotel with a nurse from his workplace. And the second, there's a possibility you two are not legally married. Not legally married. What does that mean? I had asked in shock. I overheard your husband and his mistress at a cafe. He said they didn't need to worry about alimony or property division since they never submitted a marriage registration. What? I can't believe it. We've been living as a married couple for 10 years. I don't know why he didn't submit the marriage registration, but that's why he never let you handle any official procedures, the investigator had explained. Yeah, that seems to be the case. I can't believe this. How could this happen? It's rare to hear about someone not submitting a marriage registration for 10 years, but it's not unheard of. This is too much. Am I just supposed to accept this? Not necessarily, the investigator said, a glimmer of hope in his voice. What do you mean? Let's make him pay for deceiving you for 10 years. First, we need to prepare without him noticing. And so, I began my preparation with the investigator, ready to punish my husband for everything he'd done to me. So what if you knew we were never married from the start? It doesn't matter what I do with other women. I don't need to take any responsibility, Robert said, trying to brush off his actions. You said I was pitiful for not knowing anything, but it seems you're the one who's pitiful. What do you mean? We're considered to be in a common law relationship on paper. So what? He scoffed. You might not know, but you can actually claim alimony and divide property in a common law relationship. What? His confidence wavered for the first time. He didn't know that not registering as a legal marriage could backfire on him. Yes, you can make claims in a common law relationship. It's not well known, but it's possible. Of course, there are some conditions. Conditions? Robert asked, his voice suddenly uncertain. The common law relationship is established based on 2 criteria. First, both parties must have the intent to marry. If it's just living together, that's cohabitation. Mutual intent to marry is key. That seems subjective and hard to judge, he said, trying to dismiss it. For instance, if you had a wedding ceremony or were recognized as a couple by others, it can be acknowledged. We've had a wedding ceremony, and our parents and friends know us as a couple, Robert muttered. Then the first criterion is met. The second is living as if married. This includes sharing a household for over 3 years. You and I have been living together as a couple for over 10 years. As a homemaker, I've obviously shared the household finances. This is recognized as a marital relationship. So that means. It means if I can provide proof of what we've discussed, I can claim alimony and divide the property, I said calmly. I'm not an expert, so I've already consulted a lawyer. After meeting with the lawyer, I was told I could claim alimony and property division from my husband. I informed Robert of this, watching as his face turned pale. The confidence that had been so strong moments ago drained away. But even if you can claim alimony and property division, you're just an unemployed woman. Do you plan to rely on your parents after being kicked out? He snapped. Didn't I say I was preparing? I've already found a job starting next month. I've also secured a new place to live. Don't worry about me, I replied, my voice calm but firm. He stared at me, speechless. You thought I, a clueless homemaker, would be helpless. But the tables have turned. I stood up and smiled coldly. And just so you know, I'll be discussing this with your parents. Do you not care what happens to your father? He threatened. If they break the contract, it'll ruin him. Let them, I said, unfazed. Sure, you were the link to the hospital, but the contract continued because of my father and his company's efforts. Whether or not they keep the contract is up to them. Let's see if the hospital will break a contract just because their doctor's 10-year marriage was a lie. Try telling them that. My father and I won't be affected if the contract is broken over this. In fact, it'll only show the depth of their trust. We'll just find another hospital to partner with, Robert said dismissively as I took out my phone. You're not calling your parents, are you? He asked, his voice suddenly panicked. That's exactly what I'm doing. Our parents think we're still married, so it's only natural to inform them if this relationship is ending. To my surprise, my husband's demeanor changed. He began to apologize. Please, let me talk to them. Don't call. Why? You know how strict my parents are. If they find out about this, I'm done, he pleaded. I stared at him, incredulous. What does that have to do with me? Ha! You're asking me not to tell the truth because your parents are strict. Are you kidding? You could have refused the marriage from the start if you didn't intend to marry. Now, after 10 years of a selfish marriage, you're afraid of your parents finding out. I can't accept such a convenient story. But I can accept your story, I continued coldly. I'll make sure to tell both your parents and mine. And so, I called both sets of parents. All 4 were shocked upon hearing the truth, and a meeting was promptly arranged at our house. When everyone had gathered, Robert's father was the first to speak. I've heard everything over the phone. Is it true that you pretended to be married for 10 years without submitting a marriage registration? Speak up, you foolish son. It's true. I didn't submit it, Robert admitted, his voice low. Why would you do such a thing? Didn't you think about how Sophia would feel? His father demanded. I had no choice. No choice, you say. How can you even say that? It's actually your fault, Dad and Mom. I didn't want to get married, yet you started looking for a bride on your own, saying it was time I got married. You arranged meetings and tried to force a marriage on me. You're the one who agreed to the marriage, aren't you? His mother interjected. I had to agree. If I had refused, you would have made a fuss about it, so I decided to get married. If you were resolved to marry, why didn't you submit the marriage registration? His father pressed. I read about a man on the internet who was in the same situation, Robert began defensively. He didn't want to marry but had to because of his parents. He lived a married life without submitting the registration and then revealed the truth when he found someone he truly loved. That's appalling. And what happened to that man in the end? His father asked, disgusted. He's now married to the person he loves and has a real marriage. So, I too will marry my girlfriend and have a real marriage, Robert said confidently. At that moment, my parents, who had been silent until now, finally spoke up. My father's voice was filled with anger and disappointment. A real marriage, huh? Sure, you might not have had a love marriage. But do you remember what you said at the wedding? We will never forget to care for each other and build a home full of smiles. What did those words mean to you? What were we shown that day? He paused, his eyes narrowing at Robert. We sent our daughter to you, hoping for her happiness, but you deceived her for 10 years by not submitting the marriage registration. Did you build a home full of smiles? Now you're leaving her for another woman. Can someone who acts without a shred of care, even if they change partners, truly have a real marriage? Robert stammered, well, that's... My father cut him off. I was happy you married our daughter, not just because you were a doctor. I thought she could build a happy home with someone as sincere as you, my father began, his voice heavy with disappointment. But it seems we were mistaken, deceived, even. And you threatened our daughter. If she told us the truth, you said you'd cut off the contract with our company. Seriously. Robert shifted uncomfortably, but my father's voice grew sharper. If you're going to threaten our daughter, we'll cut off the contract ourselves. Be warned. And we'll tell the truth when asked why. Robert's face paled. If you do that, there will be rumors at the hospital, he stammered, panicking. Rumors? Well, yes, my father replied coldly. But that's the result of your actions. You were the one who threatened us with cutting off the contract. My husband was in complete panic now, his voice trembling. Please, wait. This is getting out of hand. Let's just talk. Don't mess with us, my father-in-law bellowed, grabbing Robert by the collar, his face flushed with rage. We didn't raise you to be such a scoundrel. What were you thinking? Father, please stop. Robert pleaded, his voice desperate. By not submitting the marriage registration, you might have thought you were doing yourself a favor, his father continued, his voice thunderous. But because of your selfish actions, Sophia was strung along for 10 years. What were you thinking, causing such trouble for others? The living room fell silent. Robert, faced with his father's fury, had nothing more to say. His usual arrogance was nowhere to be found. Sophia, and to your parents, my father-in-law began, his tone softening, I'm truly sorry for the trouble caused by this idiot. No, you parents shouldn't apologize, my father responded. It's not your fault. However, Robert's father sighed, it's partly our responsibility as parents for letting him act this way. For now, we'll take him home and make sure he doesn't continue this reckless behavior. We'll deal with the aftermath properly. We're very sorry for all this. With that, Robert was taken away by his parents, back to his childhood home. You've been through a lot, my father said softly, turning to me. For now, you should come back home and rest. We'll think about what to do next later. You don't need to worry about anything right now. My parents looked at me with such kindness, their concern evident. Thank you, I said, smiling softly. But I won't go back home just yet. I still have things I need to do. I declined their offer and stayed in my own home. What I had to do was prepare for the final settlement with my now ex-husband, gathering evidence for our common-law relationship and preparing to claim alimony and divide our assets. A few weeks later, a meeting with a lawyer was arranged. Robert, still defiant, couldn't hold back his frustration. Even if I agree to alimony, why should I divide my property, he spat. She's been a homemaker for 10 years, never working a day. All the furniture, clothes, food, I paid for everything. And now you're telling me I have to hand over the money. I worked hard for her. He ranted, unable to accept that his money would be shared with me. Yes, that's correct. The money you earned and the furniture are subject to property division. Why does it have to be like that? Who did the housework while you were working? Who cooked meals with the groceries you bought? That's irrelevant now. No, it's very relevant. A homemaker is entitled to property division because housework and childcare have economic value. Speaking as a human, not just a lawyer, do you think housework is something anyone can do, that it's just expected of a homemaker? The reason you could live freely is because of her support. Don't get that wrong. What? This situation is a result of your actions, yet you have the audacity to be selfish. What did you say? Never mind. Anyway, she's entitled to half of the assets for property division. That's how it is. Damn. Regarding alimony, we intend to claim $100,000 from you. $100,000. Why so much for a relationship that wasn't even a marriage? It's precisely because you weren't married. Normally, alimony claims in common law relationships range from $10,000 to $40,000. However, in your case, you pretended to be married for 10 years and selfishly tried to kick her out when you found someone else. The amount is determined by the severity and duration of your actions. But still, you may think 10 years is just a short time, but it's longer than you realize. During that time, she devoted herself to you, believing you were a married couple. You have no right to complain after betraying her. A perfect rebuttal. He couldn't say anything and reluctantly agreed to my demands. Then I also sent a notice of claim for alimony to his mistress. I knew who and where she was, thanks to the investigator. As he had said, she was a nurse working at the same hospital. The mistress, having heard from him that there was no possibility of alimony or property division, must have been utterly shocked by the contents of the claim. Wait a minute. This isn't what you told me. What do you want? I told you not to talk to me at the hospital. I got this from your wife. You said there wouldn't be any alimony because we weren't married. What's this all about? I later learned that in a panic, after being served with the alimony claim from me, she confronted him at the hospital with the notice I had sent. Okay, let's talk about this later. Not here. There are too many people around. We'll both be in trouble if this turns into a rumor. I don't care about that. I can't pay this kind of alimony. You said it was okay, so you should pay it for me. What? I won't pay a penny. You were the one who wanted this relationship. You said I was the only one for you, that you wanted to marry me. Hey, quiet down. Everyone can hear us. Just so you know, I'm not in the wrong here. If you want to make amends with your wife, do it yourself. Tell her I don't owe her a penny, that you'll take care of everything. Wait, hold on. Hey. This exchange led to the revelation of their affair to the entire hospital. It quickly became the talk of the place. And then, the final blow came with my father's request to the hospital. I apologize, but we would like to terminate our contract at the end of next month, he said. The hospital, already aware of the rumors, hesitantly asked my father, "Excuse me for asking, but is the reason for canceling the contract related to Dr. Roberts' affair?" It's already become a rumor. Yes, a nurse presumed to be involved caused quite a scene. I never imagined this would happen, my father admitted. He had been pretending to be married for 10 years without submitting a marriage registration. I never expected it to turn out like this. You mean he never submitted the marriage registration? They asked, shocked. Weren't you aware? All we knew was that while being married, he had an affair, my father explained. What do you mean he didn't submit the marriage registration? With my father's request, it was revealed that Dr. Robert had been deceiving me for 10 years by not submitting the marriage registration. This news quickly spread among the other nurses. Dr. Robert deceived his wife for 10 years without submitting a marriage registration, and he had an affair with a nurse. How low can you go? How could he do that? They whispered. Can someone really not notice for 10 years? Apparently, Sophia's maiden name was the same, and he managed all the official paperwork. That's scary, another nurse added. The rumors didn't just stay within the hospital staff. They spread to the patients, and soon both Robert and his mistress were receiving cold stares. Unable to endure the shame, they both resigned from the hospital. As my father later told me, did you manage to get the alimony? Yes, I received payments from both him and his mistress. She refused to pay until the end, claiming she was deceived, but the lawyer made it clear her argument wouldn't hold, and she reluctantly agreed to pay. That's good. What about the contract? Was it cancelled after all? He asked. No, that's off the table. He resigned, and since our company is trusted, the hospital asked us not to cancel the contract. We couldn't cancel it after they asked like that. That's a relief. After that, I started a new life in a new place and was living happily. About a year and a half later, my ex-husband contacted me. Is it true you got remarried? He asked. I had indeed married a man I met at work, and somehow, he had found out. I wonder whose number this is, I said, puzzled. Going through the trouble of changing your number just to contact me. Just answer my question. Yes or no? Did you get married? He demanded. Yes, I got married, I replied calmly. You betrayed me, he spat. Betray? We were never legally married, so I didn't think it would matter to you, right? I responded. That's a different matter, he fumed. Indeed, things are different now. We're completely separated, so my marriage has nothing to do with you. Is that why you contacted me? I asked. After I said this, he seemed at a loss for words. Then he taunted, of course, you're still unmarried, since you probably haven't submitted a marriage registration. You're that kind of woman. But things weren't as he imagined. Unfortunately for you, my husband isn't the kind of person to do such terrible things. He knows all about your story, so to ensure I wouldn't feel anxious, we went to the office together to submit the registration. Sadly for you, things aren't as you thought. I could hear his frustration, but I added, I can somewhat understand your wish for me to be unhappy, considering your own misery, but sorry, we're happily married. With that, I hung up the phone. What kind of life he leads now, I don't know. But unless he changes his selfish nature, it's unlikely he'll ever find happiness.
Well, thanks for your long service as a housekeeper. We don't need a caregiver anymore, so we're getting a divorce today. I had been caring for my father-in-law for 15 years, stepping in for my husband and mother-in-law. Just after my father-in-law passed away suddenly, my husband, who rarely came home, appeared with his mistress. Despite the recent conclusion of the funeral, he told me in a joking tone with a smirk on his face and then thrust a divorce paper at me. Thanks for everything, old hag. I'll be expecting the compensation. Laughing derisively, the mistress standing behind my husband also looked down on me. Yes, after all my dedication over 15 years, this is your true face. I smirked inwardly as I stared intently at my husband's face, and muttered expressionlessly, yes, gladly. Annoyed by my attitude, Tony spat out, what's with that attitude, Hillary? My husband, no, this man didn't understand the situation at all. He had no idea how miserable his circumstances were going to be. My name is Hillary Irving, a 43-year-old housewife. I have been married to Tony, a company employee, for 15 years. Due to various circumstances, we have no children. Over these years, I have been constantly struggling. It was also a time of drifting apart from my husband. Tony and I met 16 years ago when I was working at a diner. I had a dream of owning my own place, and since college, I had been working part-time at this popular local diner known for its home-cooked meals, beloved by all ages. After graduating, I aimed to eventually take over the business and began working there full-time. Tony, a fresh-faced corporate worker in his second year, soon became a regular and started venting to me about his job almost every day. Talking to you, Hillary, somehow clears my mind. That's great, eat lots and do your best tomorrow. Thank you, Hillary. I initially saw Tony, 5 years younger, as a cute younger brother. As we talked more, our relationship grew closer, and about a year after we met, Tony seriously confessed his feelings. I think I can build a warm home with you, Hillary. Please, will you marry me? His earnest words were unlike any before, and I was unexpectedly swept off my feet. May I think about it? Even as I said that, my mind was half made up. Building a warm home was as important a dream to me as owning my diner. Eventually, we agreed I would continue working even after marrying, and we started our new life together. However, the dream of a happy married life with Tony was soon confronted with harsh reality. Right after the wedding, Tony announced that we would be living with his parents. His father had suffered a stroke a few years back and become bedridden, and his mother, with poor mobility, struggled with caregiving alone. Not having met them before our marriage, I was only told about this after the fact. I hesitated to live together, but Tony acted as if it was decided, leaving no room for my input, and pushed his parents' care onto me. Family should take care of family. How could I be so heartless as to send Dad to a facility or rely on strangers? But it's hard for just your mother and me to care for your father. We should at least use day services. Who's got money for that? My mom managed all this time. Now you're here, you can handle it. You're part of this family now, so stop complaining and take care of Dad and Mom. He coldly dismissed me, and from then on, Tony never listened to my objections. Half a year later, the naive and kind Tony I knew was nowhere to be found. In hindsight, from the beginning of our marriage, he had decided to treat me more like a housekeeper than a wife. But by the time I realized this, it was too late. Still, the only reason I could endure this marriage was thanks to my in-laws. From the start of our cohabitation, they were incredibly kind to me. Before becoming bedridden, my father-in-law had been a dignified executive at a major company, and continued to be a man of character, always considerate of his wife and me who cared for him. I'm truly sorry to burden a young person like you, Hillary. I've told Tony many times to put me in a facility, but he won't listen. While immobile, he earnestly apologized. If only I could move more, I could make things a bit easier for you. With these kind words, my mother-in-law often dabbed at her eyes. The way they treated me sometimes reminded me of my own parents, who I lost to a car accident when I was in middle school. After their death, I bounced around relatives, living a lonely life. Wanting to create a place for myself, I pursued a dream of owning a diner. Studying business management in college with the help of student loans. Eating brought back memories of the precious days spent with my parents. My mother's delicious home-cooked meals still lived in my memory, always bringing me happiness. That's why I wanted to recreate my mother's flavors in my own diner. My parents always smiled kindly at me in my memories. The nostalgic image of my parents and the compassionate presence of my in-laws overlapped, making me feel as if they were my real parents. Tony must have his reasons. But I would prefer to stay by your side, Dad and Mom, for as long as possible. As I said this, my in-laws again cried and thanked me. Building a warm home with Tony might be difficult, but cherishing my in-laws could compensate for that. With this in mind, I gave up on my dream of the diner, quit my job, and dedicated myself to home life. 15 years passed. Life wasn't easy. Within a year of our marriage, Tony rarely came home, leaving mostly just the three of us, my in-laws and me. Tony restricted my activities and gave me only the bare minimum for living expenses. You're a housewife, so you don't need much money. Be grateful I'm providing for you. Each time, he spitefully tossed me a small amount of money. Of course, what Tony gave was not enough to live on. So I dipped into my savings from before I was married. Hillary, this is for you. One day, after years of such a life, my mother-in-law quietly handed me a substantial amount of money. Mom, I can't accept this. She smiled kindly and gently pushed an envelope filled with money toward me. It's all right. You always cook such delicious meals for us. My husband is very happy with your cooking, it's very comforting. Her words and gentle smile filled my heart with joy. My father-in-law's condition had worsened over the years, and he couldn't swallow normal food anymore. So, I had been carefully preparing meals that he could eat. Yet, when Tony occasionally came home, he would always complain about my cooking. Hey, how can you serve such lousy food with a straight face? Your cooking really sucks. Are you kidding me? Laughing foolishly at his own rude words, Tony's behavior was trivial to me. I sighed quietly to myself. Wouldn't it be better to at least look at your father's face instead? Shut up. Don't tell me what to do. Eventually, Tony left the house with a sulky look on his face. Perhaps unhappy that I gave no response. This behavior repeated several times, and Tony increasingly stayed away from home. Meanwhile, my father-in-law, weakened by illness, started to be frequently hospitalized. However, there was a bit of good news. My mother-in-law managed to walk almost normally thanks to her diligent rehabilitation. But probably, Tony hadn't noticed this because he remained indifferent towards his own parents. One night, unusually, Tony came home late. He entered the house with loud, stumbling footsteps, appearing to be very drunk. Hey, the master is back, and you're not even here to greet me. What a privileged housekeeper you are. Tony, not bothering to hide his true feelings, was shouting insults loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Get the bath ready. As usual, you're a housekeeper who can't anticipate needs. No sooner had he shouted this than he sprawled out on the living room sofa and began to snore loudly. I turned around to heat the bath as instructed. Just then, a familiar electronic sound hit my back. I quickly turned around and saw Tony's smartphone. The screen lit up for a moment, displaying a message adorned with the name Claire and heart emojis. I gasped involuntarily. The message read, "The trip to Hawaii was so fun. Thanks for all the bags." Then, the smartphone screen went dark again. I stood there, frozen, staring at it. Feelings of disbelief and resignation washed over me alternately. Tony was having an affair. How long had it been? Why? Such questions and emotions mixed inside me, and I instinctively covered my face with my hands. As I staggered back to my room, I noticed my mother-in-law peeking out of her room. But I said nothing and silently returned to my room. The next day, Tony was once again gone from the house before I knew it. I thought I had heard shouting earlier, but I ignored it and sat blankly. After a while, my mother-in-law hesitantly called out from outside the room. "Hillary, something happened last night, didn't it?" When she asked me directly, I burst out crying loudly. Rushing into my room, my mother-in-law hugged me. Feeling her warmth, the reality of last night hit me. And I told her loudly about what I had seen. Dark emotions kept rising in me, and I couldn't keep my voice down. While hugging me, my mother-in-law kept apologizing tearfully. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, Hillary." After a while, I calmed down considerably. "Hillary, you know, I've been thinking." She started to tell me about a plan she had. Just then, a loud thud came from my father-in-law's room downstairs. We hurried down to him. It seemed he had heard my loud voice. With a pale face, he apologized to me repeatedly. Seeing him in pain, I quickly called an ambulance. However, a few days after being taken to the hospital, my father-in-law passed away. Grieving, we managed to arrange his funeral. "Dad, why did you have to die?" Tony showed up at the funeral and dramatically wailed in front of the coffin. Staring blankly, I wondered what he was even saying now. As Tony cried excessively, funeral staff and a few male relatives eventually had to carry him away. After Tony was taken away, my mother-in-law and I quietly said our goodbyes to my father-in-law. Everything felt like it had ended in an instant, and I felt an overwhelming emptiness. No more tears came. Then, Tony reappeared in front of us with a young woman. In flashy attire, surely his mistress, Claire. Smirking, Tony handed me the divorce papers. "Well, thanks for your long service as a housekeeper. We don't need a caregiver anymore, so we're getting a divorce today." "Tony, what are you doing?" Ignoring his mother's angry outburst, Tony arrogantly continued. "You were just a housekeeper after all, so no compensation. I've been supporting you all this time. I could even demand compensation from you." "Be grateful," he said, smirking, while Claire grimaced behind him, which surprised me. "What are you even saying?" I thought. "That's the deal, Mom. I'll be going home with Claire from now on. Take care." Then, turning to me with a grin, Tony said, "So, get that divorce paper filed." Hearing the all-too-predictable words, I couldn't help but snort. "Yes, gladly." And with that, I turned on my heel and headed to the office. Everything was going so smoothly, it was almost scary. With that thought, I submitted the divorce papers. Feeling as if a 15-year burden was being lifted, I walked away light-footedly. Feeling lighter in both body and spirit, I started walking away cheerfully. Then, suddenly, Claire appeared. With a furious red face, she threw some words at me. I laughed silently at the thoughtless mistress in front of me, and executed another plan I had prepared. A week later, I visited my in-laws' house with someone. As I had informed them by phone beforehand, my mother-in-law smoothly opened the door. We headed straight to the living room, where Tony, seeing me, exclaimed in surprise, "Hey, why are you here?" "Because I invited her here," my mother-in-law said sharply. "First, about Father's estate." As my mother-in-law spoke, Tony leaned forward eagerly. Before he could speak, the man seated next to me placed a stack of documents on the table and solemnly announced, "Father had entrusted us with his will during his lifetime." "This is who I am," the man said, offering Tony a business card. "A lawyer." Yes, the lawyer nodded, unfolding a document. This is the will left by your father. It stated that the property was to be divided equally. Then my mother-in-law pulled out a passbook, opened it to the last page, and placed it on the table. This is the only property left by your father. The balance showed just a few dollars. Tony, seeing this, was shocked. What is this? He grabbed the passbook and examined it from end to end. Your father needed care for 15 years. There's no way any savings would have remained. At his mother-in-law's words, Tony's shoulders slumped dejectedly. I then pressed him further. Next, about my compensation. Hearing the word compensation, Tony suddenly looked up, his eyes bloodshot and breathing heavily. You said you didn't need compensation, right? I never agreed to that. Where's the proof? Tony, at a loss for words, watched as I took out my smartphone. I opened an app and played a recording. Compensation is indeed necessary. Claire's voice could be heard saying. Indeed, when I had gone to file the divorce papers, Claire had spoken to me like that. I turned to the lawyer next to me. Will this serve as evidence? As for evidence, during the marriage, the husband had an inappropriate relationship with another woman. So the wife fully has the right to demand compensation. The lawyer responded seriously with a slight frown. At this, Claire raised her voice in surprise. But, at that time, Tony said he could claim compensation because he supported her. At this, the lawyer let out a large sigh and stared directly at Claire, stating firmly, support during the marriage is the husband's duty. Neglecting this can indeed be grounds for divorce, and can lead to compensation obligations. Furthermore, the lawyer paused, taking a deep breath, and looked sharply at Claire again. As a mistress, you too could be liable for compensation claims by the wife. In essence, both Tony and Claire must pay compensation to Hillary. Caught off guard by the lawyer's businesslike tone, Claire was momentarily speechless. However, regaining her composure, she turned to Tony and snapped. Tony, you liar. You said we'd get a lot of money. I didn't know either. While we all sighed deeply, thinking how could he not know? In any case, we will be proceeding with the compensation claim. Please arrange for the payment promptly. Clearing his throat, the lawyer addressed them in a slightly pressured tone. Thanks to that, I managed to receive a somewhat generous compensation. 3 months after divorcing Tony, I was busy living alone in a town slightly removed from my in-laws. There were many things to prepare, and my days were hectic. One day, out of the blue, Tony called. Hey, help me out. Something terrible has happened. It seemed that the last strategy we had set up was finally taking effect. Smiling inwardly, I asked my ex-husband in a solemn tone. What happened? Is something wrong? It's my mom, she's acting strange. Understood. I'll head to your mother's house right away. When I arrived at my in-laws' house after a long time, it was in a terrible state. The kitchen and dining room were particularly bad, with unwashed dishes left for days and garbage strewn about, emitting a foul odor. My mother-in-law was sitting dazed in her room, muttering something under her breath. The appalling condition made me bite my lip hard. Seeing my solemn expression, Tony frowned deeply and murmured weakly. After you left, Mom's condition got worse. She started to act violently and didn't recognize me anymore. When I took her to the hospital, they said it might be dementia. Hearing this, I frowned even more. Tony must have initially tried to care for his mother himself, probably pushing most of the responsibility onto Claire, just as he had dumped his father's caregiving on me. Then Claire said she couldn't handle the caregiving and suggested putting her in a facility. Tony apparently has started to look for a facility without opposing Claire. Mom used to say she saved a lot of money, so when I looked for her bank book, I found lots of stock certificates instead. And when I finally found the bank book, there was almost nothing left. Tony said, ruffling his hair and spitting out the words. Damn, this wasn't supposed to happen. Claire ran off with my bank book as soon as she found out there was no money left. Listening to Tony, I sighed deeply. He really was a despicable man through and through. Breaking up with him was definitely the right decision. How Tony interpreted my sigh, I wasn't sure, but he looked at me pleadingly. Please, Hillary. Help me out. I closed my eyes, blocking out any more of Tony's sight. I didn't want to see his face for another second. I quickly finished what I had to do and prepared to take my mother-in-law from there. I'll take care of your mother. Tony, seizing on my words, shouted, Really? I cut him off sharply. But on one condition. You must never show your face to us again. Agreed? I glared at Tony with all my might. Perhaps overwhelmed by my intensity, Tony stumbled back a bit. A takeaway box crunched under his feet. Shortly after, I left the house with my mother-in-law, who quietly walked beside me. Her steps surprisingly firm. I squeezed her hand tightly. That was some acting. Mom, too. We both chuckled quietly. Yes, this had all been a plan orchestrated by my mother-in-law. Of course, she hadn't developed dementia nor had she squandered her assets on stocks. It was all an act to escape from Tony. The state of the house, however, had been quite terrible. Wasn't that a bit too much? Then she replied with a refined smile. It was a good lesson for Tony. He got what he deserved. On the night Tony's affair was exposed, my mother-in-law, while hugging me, had firmly said she would sever ties with Tony. She then suggested that we formalize our relationship through adoption. And from then, she informed me of this plan. Believing in the success of her strategy, I had been preparing and waiting. Now, we would live peacefully, just the two of us. 3 years have passed since then. I heard through the grapevine that Tony and Claire had eventually split up. A chain is only as strong as its weakest link, they say. Well, it was an inevitable outcome. With financial support from my mother-in-law, I started a diner. It is now thriving, and every day is bustling with activity. Recently, Tony showed up at my diner, looking much older than his years. Despite being 5 years younger than me. Hey, it seems you're doing pretty well. Lend me some money, he said in a servile tone. Your mother's funeral you didn't attend, did you? I gave you one last courtesy by informing you. Indeed, my mother-in-law passed away not long after that incident. Even if for a brief period, we had managed the diner together as a real family. Those days had become a precious memory for me. At my words, Tony's face contorted, but before he could speak, the regulars at the diner, all fans of my mother-in-law, started shouting angrily at him. In no time, they had kicked him out of the diner. He began shouting loudly outside. I approached Tony and presented him with a restraining order we had signed when I took my mother-in-law into my care. You haven't forgotten this, have you? I'll call the police. With a short scream, Tony fled and never returned to the diner again. Marriage? I'd had enough. While occasionally receiving proposals from regulars, I gently declined. Continuing to run my dream diner, cherishing my memories with my mother-in-law.
Hi, I'm Anna. I've been with Rob for quite a while now. We met in college, got married soon after, and have been together for 15 years. Life with Rob was generally peaceful. We lived in a decent house, had good jobs, and shared a bunch of common interests. But there was always something missing: a child. You see, we tried for years to get pregnant. We visited doctors, tried different treatments, and even considered adoption. But nothing worked. As time went on, the strain of our childless reality began to pull at our once strong bond. Arguments became frequent, and the future started to look a bit gloomy. But then one day, something changed. It was a regular Wednesday morning. I woke up feeling a little queasy. Thinking it was something I ate, I brushed it off. But then I remembered. I had missed my period. Could it be? I quickly rummaged through the bathroom cupboard and found a leftover pregnancy test from years ago. Without wasting a moment, I used it, waiting for the result. The result felt like the longest 3 minutes of my life. When I finally dared to look, it was positive. My heart raced. We were pregnant. The joy, the excitement, the fear, it all rushed in. I had to tell Rob. He was in the living room, engrossed in some paperwork. Taking a deep breath, I walked up to him, the test still in my hand. "Rob," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm pregnant." He looked up, his expression unreadable. Then he said, "Are you sure? I mean, at this age, is it even safe?" I was taken aback. This wasn't the reaction I was expecting. "I took the test, Rob. It's positive," I said, trying to reassure him. He sighed. "Anna, you know how hard it's been. And now, at 37, do you know the risks?" I felt a sting of hurt. "I thought you'd be happy," I whispered. "I am. I'm worried about you, about us," he replied, his voice softening a bit. "We've waited so long for this, Rob. We can't let fear dictate our happiness now," I countered. He looked down, avoiding my gaze. "Have you considered maybe not going through with it?" he asked. I couldn't believe my ears. "Terminate the pregnancy?" "No, Rob. This might be our only chance." We sat in silence for a while, the weight of our situation pressing down on both of us. I wanted him to be as overjoyed as I was, but at that moment, all I saw in his eyes was fear and uncertainty. That night, as we lay side by side in bed, I held on to hope. Hope that our child would bring us closer again. Hope that our love was strong enough to overcome any challenge, and above all, hope for the future. The next few months were tough. As days turned into weeks, it became clear that this pregnancy wasn't going to be easy. I was often sick, nauseated, and felt exhausted all the time. But each little kick from inside reminded me why it was all worth it. One day, after feeling particularly weak, I collapsed. Thankfully, Rob was home and immediately rushed me to the hospital. As I lay on the cold hospital bed, surrounded by beeping machines, I felt more vulnerable than ever before. "Is she going to be okay?" I heard Rob ask Dr. Mitchell, his voice laced with worry. "She needs rest," Dr. Mitchell replied. "Her body is under a lot of strain due to the pregnancy. It's imperative that she stays relaxed and avoids any stress." That hospital stay was the first of many. Each time I was admitted, I'd watch Rob from the window, pacing back and forth in the hospital corridor, talking on the phone, sometimes even arguing with the billing department. One evening, as I lay in the hospital bed, Rob walked in with a weary look on his face. He looked like he hadn't slept for days. "I met with Dr. Mitchell," he began. "He said we need to consider the possibility of bed rest for the remainder of the pregnancy." I nodded slowly. "If it's best for the baby, I'll do it." Rob sat down next to me, holding my hand. I'm sorry, Anna. I wish I could do more to help. I squeezed his hand. You're here with me, that's more than enough. However, as the days went by, Rob's visits became less frequent. Sometimes he'd call, other times he'd send a text saying he was caught up with work. But the distance between us seemed to be growing. During one of my longer hospital stays, feeling particularly low and missing the comfort of my home, I asked a nurse if I could use the phone to call Rob. It's been 3 days, I said, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. When he answered, You haven't visited. I know, Anna. It's hard for me seeing you like this, he admitted. Rob, I need you now more than ever, I pleaded. Silence. I'll try to come by tomorrow, he finally said, his voice distant. But tomorrow turned into the day after, and soon a week had passed. Feeling isolated and alone, I confided in my nurse, Lisa. He's probably just scared, she suggested, trying to be comforting. Sometimes when people can't handle situations, they distance themselves. One morning, after a particularly difficult night, Dr. Mitchell came into my room. I think it's time we discuss the birth plan, Anna, he began cautiously. There are some decisions to be made. Rob, despite his absences, was there for that discussion. We sat hand in hand, listening to our options, praying for the strength to make the right choices. Days turned into weeks, and as the date approached, I felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. But I held on to hope, believing that once our child arrived, everything would fall into place. Little did I know, the hardest part of our journey was yet to come. The first moments of holding my daughter Emma in my arms were moments of pure bliss. Her tiny fingers, her soft cooing sounds, it felt like a dream. But that dream was quickly shattered by Dr. Mitchell's grim announcement. Anna, Rob, he began with a heavy sigh, there are some concerns regarding Emma's health. That evening, as I cradled Emma, Rob walked into the room, a storm brewing in his eyes. Anna, he started, his voice shaking. How could you? Giving birth at this age, we knew the risks. Tears welled up in my eyes. Rob, I thought we wanted this. I thought we wanted a family. He was nearly shouting now. You should have considered an abortion. Why bring a child into the world with so many complications because of your selfishness? I was shocked. Rob, she's our daughter. We should be together in this, not pointing fingers. His face was red with anger. I can't believe I'm in this situation. I can't raise a child with potential disabilities. It's not the life I imagined. As the weight of his words sank in, a cold dread filled my heart. So what are you saying, Rob? He hesitated for a moment. I don't think I can do this. I can't be here, not like this. It felt like the floor had been pulled from beneath me. You're abandoning your daughter because she might be different? He looked away, unable to meet my gaze. I just can't handle it, Anna. Devastation turned into determination. Fine. If you're leaving, then leave for good. But you'll have no claim over Emma. He didn't respond. Instead, he turned and walked away, leaving me with our newborn daughter, grappling with the uncertainty of our future. The first few weeks after Rob left were the hardest. The house felt empty, but the silence was deafening, and the reality of being a single mother weighed heavily on me. But every time I looked into Emma's big, innocent eyes, I felt a surge of determination. I was going to make sure she had the best life possible, no matter what it took. My sister Linda was a godsend during this time. She came over often, helping with household chores and looking after Emma so I could rest. One evening, as I was feeding Emma, Linda walked in holding 2 mugs of hot cocoa. Anna, she began gently, You need to think about the future. Have you considered finding a place of your own? I sighed, looking around the home that held so many memories. I've thought about it, but the thought of leaving this place, it's just hard. Linda took my hand. I know. But think about Emma. This house will always remind you of Rob and everything that happened. You both deserve a fresh start. She was right. I needed to let go of the past and focus on building a new life for Emma and me. The search for a new place wasn't easy with my limited savings and no job. Options were limited. But then one day, Linda called me excitedly. Anna, you won't believe what I found. There's a small house for rent in my neighborhood. It's perfect for you and Emma. I went to see the house the very next day. It was a cozy 2-bedroom place with a small garden in the back. The landlord, Mrs. Peterson, was a kind elderly lady who lived next door. Linda speaks very highly of you, Mrs. Peterson said, smiling warmly. The place is yours if you want it. I felt tears of gratitude welling up. Thank you, Mrs. Peterson. This means so much to me. Moving in was hectic, but with Linda's help, we managed. As I set up Emma's room, filling it with toys and her tiny clothes, a sense of peace washed over me. This was our home, our sanctuary. Linda popped her head into the room. How's it going in here? I smiled, hugging Emma close. It's perfect. I can't thank you enough. She hugged us both. That's what family is for. You're not alone in this, Anna. Remember that. Days turned into weeks, and life began to settle into a new routine. Morning walks with Emma, visits to the local park, and coffee dates with Linda became our new normal. One day, as Emma and I were playing in the garden, Mrs. Peterson walked over, holding a tray of freshly baked cookies. Thought you two could use a treat, she said, smiling. I smiled back, taking a cookie. Thank you, Mrs. Peterson. It's delicious. She chuckled. Call me Ellie. Feels strange being called Mrs. Peterson by my new neighbor. We chatted as Emma giggled and played. Ellie shared stories of her own children, offering advice and wisdom. I felt a connection, a sense of community that had been missing for so long. As the days went by, the pain of the past began to fade. With the support of my sister and new friends like Ellie, I realized that while one chapter of my life had closed, another, even more beautiful one, was just beginning. Emma's first birthday was just around the corner, and I was deep in preparations. Ellie and Linda offered their assistance, suggesting ideas for decorations and games. As the day drew nearer, I found myself reflecting on the whirlwind of the past year. My baby girl, Emma, was blossoming into a bubbly, inquisitive child, her laughter a constant source of joy. One afternoon, as I was laying Emma down for her nap, the phone rang. The sound was sharp and unexpected. Hello? Hello, Anna? Came the familiar voice. It was Dr. Mitchell. I felt a twinge of anxiety. Dr. Mitchell, is there a problem? He hesitated, which only deepened my concern. Anna, I need you to come to the hospital. There's something about Emma we need to discuss. I felt my heart in my throat. Is she okay? His voice was thick with regret. Please come in. We need to talk face to face. Linda agreed to watch Emma while I rushed to the hospital. The drive felt much longer than it was, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Dr. Mitchell greeted me in his office, his usually calm face lined with worry. Anna, I'm so sorry to call you in this way. My patience was thinning. What's going on? Taking a deep breath, he began. There's been a grave error. The initial test we ran on Emma after her birth got mixed up with another baby's. My confusion grew. Meaning? He met my gaze, his eyes filled with regret. Emma is healthy, Anna. She doesn't have any medical condition. I couldn't express how deeply sorry I am. The weight of his words hit me hard. You mean to tell me I've lived this past year under false assumptions? My life turned upside down because of this? His voice was barely above a whisper. Yes, and it's my responsibility. I can't begin to fathom the pain this has caused. I thought of Rob, of the bitterness and pain this mistake had caused. It's shattered my life. Dr. Mitchell looked defeated. I know words can't change the past, but I'll do everything I can to make it right. I took a moment to collect my thoughts. I need time to process this. Driving home, a mix of relief and fury consumed me. Yet seeing Emma's joyful face as I walked in grounded me. She was my world, and she was okay. That night, Linda and I sat down, and I relayed everything. She was horrified. Anna, what are you going to do? I looked at Emma, peacefully sleeping. For now, nothing, and I don't want Rob to know. He made his choice. Linda squeezed my hand. You're strong, Anna. Remember, you're not alone in this. In the stillness of the night, I reflected on our journey. Yes, the revelation about Emma's health was bittersweet, but one thing was for sure. I would protect and cherish her regardless of the past. The swift passage of time amazed me. Before I knew it, Emma was already 5 and gearing up for her first day of school. My feelings were a whirlwind of pride, hope, and the natural apprehension of a mother. At breakfast a few days before school, Emma gazed at me, her eyes shimmering with anticipation. Mom, will I be going to school like other kids? I smiled warmly. Yes, sweetie, in just a few days you'll be starting. Her face lit up. Will I find friends there? Will they like me? Touched by her innocence, I assured her. Emma, you're such a lovely girl. Of course they'll adore you. On her first day, dressed in her new school uniform with a pink backpack hanging from her shoulders, Emma paused at the school gates. With a quiver in her voice, she admitted, Mommy, I'm scared. No one will talk to me. I crouched to her eye level. Honey, always remember to be yourself. You're amazing and they'll see that. Just give it some time. Her small hand waved goodbye as she joined the bustling crowd of students. I watched her until she was out of sight, my heart heavy with the typical worries of a parent. A few weeks later, Emma was all excitement and stories about her new friend, Sophia. Their adventures during breaks, their shared love for painting, and their little secrets. One day she bounced home asking, Mom, can Sophia come over tomorrow? Delighted at her blossoming friendship, I agreed. Absolutely. I'm eager to meet your new buddy. The next afternoon was filled with their giggles and playful shouts. From the corner of my eye, I noticed their genuine bond and thought of how childhood friendships were so pure and uncomplicated. As the sun dipped, a car pulled up. Emma, holding Sophia's hand, led her to the door. To my shock, standing there were Rob and a young woman, presumably his new wife. Emma, inside now, Rob's voice was curt. Sophia, sensing the tension, looked worriedly between her parents and me. Daddy, I had so much fun. Emma's my best friend. Rob's gaze was cold. Sophia, we've talked about this. You shouldn't play with inferior children. His voice dripped with disdain, making it clear whom he referred to. I felt a rush of anger. Before I could retort, the young woman, probably trying to mediate, gently tugged at Sophia's hand. Come, dear, let's go home. Emma stood close to me, her eyes filled with confusion and hurt as the car drove away. Mom, why did he say that? Holding her close, I replied, Sometimes, sweetie, people don't say the nicest things. But always remember, you're wonderful just the way you are. That evening, as I tucked Emma in, I promised myself that no matter what, I'd always protect her from the cruel judgments of the world. Only days after the incident, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. A woman's voice, soft yet firm, responded. "Hi, this is Emily, Sophia's mother. Can we talk?" Surprised, I replied cautiously. "Of course. What's on your mind?" She hesitated. "I'd rather discuss this face to face. Can we meet tomorrow? There's a cafe around the corner from your house." After a moment, I agreed. "All right, see you at 10 a.m. The next morning, I saw Emily waiting. She looked out of place, her pristine appearance contrasting with the laid-back vibe of the cafe. As I approached, she stood up, offering a polite if slightly forced smile. "Thank you for coming," she began, her eyes searching mine. After the other day, I couldn't shake off a nagging feeling that there's more to the story than Rob's told me. I took a deep breath. I'm not one to spread tales, but since Sophia is involved, I think you should know. She leaned forward, anticipation evident. "Please tell me everything." Over the next hour, I unfolded our past, how Rob and I had struggled with fertility, my unexpected pregnancy, his disinterest, the misdiagnosis, his leaving, and my subsequent journey with Emma. I made sure to be factual, not letting emotion color the narrative. Emily sat stunned. "He never told me any of this. He said you were the one who left him, and he always painted such a rosy picture of your marriage." I shrugged. "Sometimes people craft stories to cope or to hide." She looked defeated. "I feel like such a fool. I thought our love was genuine, but now it seems like he was just replacing one life with another." "Emily," I started, my tone firm, "it's not about him anymore. It's about Sophia and Emma. They formed a bond. I don't want Emma to suffer because of our past." She nodded. "I completely agree. Children shouldn't be dragged into adult disputes." As we parted, I felt a weight lifted. For the first time, I felt like I was truly free from Rob's shadow. Having laid our past bare that evening as Emma played with her toys, she looked up. "Mom, will I see Sophia again?" Smiling, I said, "Yes, sweetie, you will. And always remember, your past doesn't define your future. You do." My phone buzzed on the coffee table, startling me from my thoughts. Rob's name flashed on the screen, a name I hadn't expected to see in a long time. Hesitating for only a moment, I answered. "Anna." Rob's voice was filled with a mix of anger and desperation. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I frowned, taken aback. "What are you talking about?" His voice grew softer, almost pleading. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Emily left me, she filed for divorce, and she's taken everything. Everything. I've lost almost everything, Anna, and it's all because she spoke to you." I could hardly believe what I was hearing. "Rob, you made your choices." I just told her the truth. There was a heavy pause. "She also told me about Emma, that she's healthy. You never told me. Why would I? After everything you said, after everything you did, you didn't deserve to know," I retorted. Rob's voice grew desperate. "Anna, I made a mistake. I realize that now. I want to be there for Emma. I want to be there for you. We can be a family again." I scoffed in disbelief. "Now that your life's in shambles, you suddenly want us back? You're unbelievable, Rob." "Anna, I know I messed up, but I've changed. Please give me a chance." I could feel anger rising in me. "You walked out on us, Rob. You called our daughter inferior and turned your back. Now that your little fairy tale with Emily has ended, you think you can just waltz back into our lives? Think again. He sounded desperate. Anna, I was wrong. I see that now. Can't you give me another chance? No, I replied firmly. Emma and I have moved on. We're doing just fine without you, and we don't need or want you in our lives. But Anna, it's over, Rob. Goodbye. I ended the call, my heart racing. I took a deep breath, letting the emotions wash over me. Emma and I had each other, and that was all that mattered. I wouldn't let Rob's selfishness disrupt our peace. Whatever challenges lay ahead, we'd face them together.